It's also worth noting that there is literally UK history written into the original Alice in Wonderland story. Yes, the history is probably lost on those who don't actually know UK history, but come on. They don't mean to literally paint the roses red. Hello, welcome to Comprehension Points. I read books and discuss what went wrong. Also, fair warning, but this is not the audiobook. If you clicked here thinking that it was, maybe you should stick around and pick up some reading comprehension skills. Anyway, I picked up the Wonderland Trials by Sara Ella. I'm a pretty big fan of the original Alice in Wonderland series and always curious about how others are going to respin the now classic fairy tale. As always, I'm waiting for disaster while somehow hoping for the best. This book starts off with, it's hard to explain because it's all titled with the Trilogy Wood. I don't know what that is, if this is supposed to be a poorly edited prologue, but it kind of seems like the start of the story, and as I say, the beginning is the best place to start. If this is the prologue, I see that the author takes your writing advice from the likes of Stephanie Meyer. There's words. They form sentences. They probably spoil the entire story for us once we can put it all into context, but right now, they're honestly kind of gibberish. Some kind of a hint about the unnamed first-person character playing a game, except that instead of a simple game of cards, the game is likely going to end with somebody getting killed. Again, the entire thing probably spoils the entire story, but we'll hold off on judgment until I can get some actual context for this. Instead of the story being divided into different acts, this is divided into games, and game 1 is Solitaire. Chapter 1. We open on our unnamed main character listening to some kind of future tech radio. An ad is playing about how the United Kingdom is no more, but the listening device is old to the main character and doesn't exactly work great, so a good part of the first page is taken up with her fiddling around with it, which, no. Please don't. Your story is tripping right out from the gate, sweetheart. Anyway, unnamed character fiddles with the device and gets it to work so that she can listen to her podcast, which is hosted by somebody named Maddie Hatter, which I have to say, that's a clever way of doing it. Also worth noting that Maddie is a woman. After the divide, the Queen closed all of England's borders and forbade international travel, cut all ties with the United Kingdom, and severing former peace treaties with neighboring nations. I see on the author's Goodreads profile that the author is American, which sure explains why it is that she doesn't seem to know much about UK politics. I know that I probably shouldn't get hung up over what sounds like it's going to be a throwaway line, but you do realize that Queen Elizabeth's heir, Prince Charles, is literally the Prince of Wales in Scotland, which is not England. And guess who inherited the title of Prince of Wales after Queen Lizzie died? That's right, Prince William. Right out from the gate, and I've already lost a lot of respect for the author. Part of me is being angry at the United States' lackluster education system that fails to teach anything aside from how to chant USA, USA. But the author sat down and chose to write a story that takes place in England, and she actively chose to disregard literal centuries worth of history in the country that she's writing about. It's also worth noting that there is literally UK history written into the original Alice in Wonderland story. Yes, the history is probably lost on those who don't actually know UK history, but come on. They don't mean to literally paint the roses red. I get that this is some edgy alternate future with magic in it, but come on. Literal wars were fought over the right to rule over the other countries in the UK. No way would the Queen willingly give that up, even if a wizard came in and said, hand it over! Again, I'm getting way too hung up over what's likely a throwaway line, but we're also on page 2 and I'm already steamed about this. As our still unnamed character walks along, she thinks about how most people only have the bare minimum technology that gives them the news. Anything more advanced than that requires the royal stamp of approval. Needless to say, unnamed main character does not have that and thinks that she would be thrown in jail if she was caught with her technology, or murdered for it. The narration then meanders through a description of what some of Maddie's podcast covers, which is a mishmash of things. Longtime followers of mine will know that I hate books that can't be bothered to get to the actual point. There's taking the time to stop and smell the roses, and then there's stopping the plot so that we can explain something asinine that isn't even relevant. We are literally on page 3. And then finally, the book decides to get on to telling us about the plot. The titular Wonderland Trials, which basically sounds like some kind of a Hunger Games-styled card game with huge end prizes that will make enough people want to risk it all. Also worth noting that Maddie has two older brothers who had played in the trials before, named Stark and Raving, respectively. I thought that Maddie was a good name for a Mad Hatter character, but I feel like the names of her brothers were a swing and a miss. The entire Sib set needs to be sold as a whole in order for the joke to be understood. It's not good at all. As Maddie talks about her own brothers, this brings a named character to think about her sister Charlotte. Yes, the sister is named before the main character, although we're introduced to her by name by way of the main character thinking about how Charlotte would tease her. Her name is Alice, and I'm a little disappointed at how boring that Alice as the main character's name is. Part of me gets it, because if the Queen went insane and closed the borders, of course there would be a huge surge of enforced nationalism, but at the same time, come on. Be more exciting. I say to the lady who literally said that she'd named his subset Stark, Raving, and Maddie. Maddie continues on and says that the age restriction for ending the trials between the ages of 13 and 19, which... Tell me that you're writing for young adult audiences without telling me that you're writing for a young adult audience. The narration has to screech to yet another halt so that Alice can explain to us that she's 16. She doesn't know the exact date of her birth, only the year, so that she and Charlotte randomly put down March 17th. As she explains why they picked that date, the narration goes out of its way to make sure that the readers understand that the world is a lot different than it used to be. Maddie talks some about how the contestants are invited every year, but right now, I kind of don't care. The train comes, but as Alice goes to get on, she's hit with an odd dizziness. She overcomes it before she goes to get on, but as she passes the train conductor, she randomly picks his pocket, pulls a few quid out, but not all of the notes, and drops a wallet on the ground. Finally able to relax, I unzip my pullover and unbutton the collar of my cornflower blue shirt. My Bedford check skirt rides up too high when I shift. I tug it towards my knees, wishing I'd had time to change it to something more comfortable. At least I had my black and white striped tights, the only semblance of personality we're allowed at Great Expectation Preparatory Academy. Tell me that you're trying too hard to make her into Alice Little without telling me that you're trying too hard. She says that some of the girls of the school are allowed to find their own sense of self in their clothing, and it should have been Alice's year to do so, but everything changed with this mysterious divide. Anything that stands out is practically illegal now. That is this divide and the fear that followed that drove everybody to want to turn back the clock and pretend like things were back in simpler times, which apparently means overthrowing the actual government and going back to a simple monarchy, which, you know what, I'm too exhausted screaming about whales to fight about this. As Alice settles into the sea, she continues the podcast. Maddie says that the third requirement to join is that the contestants must have the Wonderland gene, and that this can be proven with the person's birth certificate. Alice wants to join the trials, but knows that she can't without her actual birth certificate. Even if she had the gene, she simply couldn't go because of that one catch. She also admits that Charlotte would never sign the permission slip. The Wonderland gene is apparently going to be this story's hot racist metaphor. Much like in the X-Men, they all want Wonderlanders to register, but the problem is that they don't want to register because, to the surprise of literally nobody, Wonderlanders are treated like dirt. Alice's things randomly spill out from her bag, and she pauses the podcast to collect them. One of the items is a vial of tea, which Alice has labeled poison. According to Charlotte, the two sisters are deathly allergic to it, yet Charlotte insists that Alice carry it around with her at all times. But Alice literally doesn't even know if this is true and has only taken her sister's word at face value. She wonders a bit about it, but decides not to risk it and puts it back into her bag. Chapter 2. The chapter opens with Alice fiddling with the locket watch and setting the alarm. I literally do not care. Then, as the train starts to move, a voice calls out from the platform. A woman starts to race for the train despite being too late, but as Alice watches, the woman literally disappears off from the platform only to reappear on the train. I am always terribly late, you see, she tells the conductor. I am told my clock is 2 days slow. Can we not? Stop it! Stop writing like this. Holy mother-forking shirtballs, stop it! Alice doesn't know how the conductor didn't notice the woman appearing on the train, but then she realizes that the guy is simply stupid since she picked his pocket not even 5 minutes earlier. Alice thought that the woman looks familiar, and as she comes closer and asks Alice if the seat is taken, Alice recognizes her. She's as recognizable as the Wonder Queen, mostly known as Lady Scarlet herself, Blanche de Lepine, rogue wonder, a wanted outlaw, unregistered foreigner. Her name is literally the White Rabbit. No. I thought that you were clever with Maddie Hatter, but that was apparently the peak of naming genius. Alice wonders why Lady Scarlet is riding the train in broad daylight, since they usually don't come out during the day and not in public like this. The conductor comes by and scans Alice's train pass and completely and utterly ignores Scarlet. Alice thinks that either the conductor is a sympathizer or that he literally can't see her. Alice thinks about turning Scarlet over to the authorities simply for the reward money. It would really help turn her life around. But the singular thing that stops Alice is that Scarlet pulls out a book. And you'll know that people don't start booktube channels if they're not giant bookworms, but come on, get some freaking priorities here. I was willing to give Alice the benefit of the doubt that maybe physical books aren't much of a thing anymore, but they are. Literally the only thing stopping Alice from turning her life around with a huge reward is that this lady pulled out a book. Alice tries and fails to see what Scarlet is reading and then goes back to the podcast. She kind of dozes off after a moment and thinks about the 4 different teams, which are after the 4 card suits: diamonds, hearts, clubs, and spades. The narration also explains that there's 2 kinds of people in the world: those who are born in Wonderland who have powers. Those kids are trained in how to use their powers from a young age. And normal people. Alice drifts in and out, barely paying attention to what Maddie is saying. And we're in chapter 2, and I'm already cutting off the narration to say that we've already developed a critical case of I don't care-itis. So much info is being shoved at us that I don't care. The train stops and the conductor says that it's the end of the line. Why the heck did Alice bother to set an alarm if she's only going to ride the train to the end of the line anyway? Did literally no editor actually tell the author no at any point? Before we can dive into why Alice has taken the train out to the slums, we jump back to an argument that she had with Charlotte earlier. Alice doesn't care about leading a normal life everybody wants her to lead, which includes things like getting good grades so that she can graduate. But Alice feels guilty over her sister, who actually likes her life. Charlotte is 26, a spinster cat lady who lives above a library in Oxford. It's only after this has been established that the author suddenly remembers that the plot she started a page ago about why Alice has come out here. For illegal gambling. She hopes to win enough so that she can move to her own place and stop being a bother to Charlotte. As Alice starts to leave, a full 5 minutes after the train stop, thanks to the rambling narration, Blanche also stands up to go. She vanishes but leaves the book behind. Chapter 3. Outside of the train station, there's a warning that trespassers in the town will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Alice thinks that the entire thing is a big joke, since not even the police care enough to come raid it. In the big cities, yes, but not here. Where here is a junction where Wonderlanders and normal people mingle. Alice hops a fence and then fiddles with the Wi-Fi on her device. And boy, if I thought that it was tedious listening to Maddie talk about the actual plot, let me tell you how excited that I am to know the Wi-Fi password. Alice hurries on to her destination, and the plot once again stalls out in favor of this. She describes the random houses she passes, which basically sound like your stereotypical English countryside small town houses. And then even the author gets bored with that, so she gives us a random memory of Alice's, of getting into a fight with Charlotte because Alice had her career assessment testing coming up. Now, long-time followers of mine will know how I feel about junk like literal children deciding their futures before they even graduate from high school, so I completely agree with Alice's assessment that deciding her future right now is absurd. But I'm getting a little frustrated with Alice's insistence that she be anything but ordinary, which I know is kind of the point of any Alice in Wonderland remake, but that doesn't stop my annoyance right now. Alice continues on, yet the author has decided that she still isn't going to get around to the actual plot. Instead, she decides to info dump on us about the Wonderlanders and the Wonderland gene. When it first came up, a lot of people panicked. People were murdered. Babies were aborted if they tested positive for the gene. Children are drowned in the river because their own parents feared what they might become. People who were born with the gene were forced onto a registry and literally branded with a W in the collarbone. Alice isn't marked, and she knows that she isn't because she knows that her own sister would have registered her. The narration then randomly tells us about some lady named Pillar and that she'd disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Right as I'm starting to question why anybody would care, does the narration think to mention that Pillar was the fraternal twin of Queen Cordelia. Don't you think that you should have established that before you went on about her mysterious disappearance? Editors? Who are they? Anyway, Cordelia used the spreading fear to her advantage to break away from Wales, Scotland, and Ireland, which is going back to my comment that I made in the first chapter. Too much history happened between all 4 countries. I doubt that the Queen would suddenly say, "Forkity bye" to all the countries she still ruled over. And all of this snowballed until anarchy reigned supreme. No more justice, it's only whatever Cordelia wanted. The Wonderlanders who somehow wanted to remain were literally branded, as mentioned, but also microchipped so that they could be tracked, and given stuff to subdue their powers. I shake off a shiver and veer left past a boarded-up library. Once full of books like the one in my bag, the place became obsolete after popular literature was banned. The mass-produced publications we have now lack creativity, imagination, and most of all, heart. And pictures. None of them have pictures. I suppose that Alice's curiosity about what book Scarlet was reading makes some sense, but at the same time, I have to wonder if the author realizes why Alice's famous line of complaining about her sister's textbook not having any pictures stems from the fact that the original Alice was 7 years old. It makes this 16-year-old Alice seem weirdly immature. Like, I enjoy a good picture book as much as the next adult, but come on. The narration continues on, and Alice still hasn't gotten to her illegal card game yet. How many pages has it been now? Even if we discount the 2 pages at the start of the chapter with her leaving the station and hopping the fence, there's still 5 pages of nonsense and info-dumping and Alice's present plot being brought to a standstill so that we can explain all of this. She finally gets to the club but can't find the magical hidden entrance. A random guard stops her and she finally asks about 2 other guards nicknamed the Walrus and the Carpenter. The guard's name is Bill, which is a really, really minor character from the original work. And you know what? I'm annoyed over this entire thing. Throw this entire story away at this point. I'm 3 chapters in and I'm ready to chuck my ebook into a river. The guy refuses to let Alice in because she's under 18 despite not actually carding her. He also makes fun of her height. Alice flashes her illegal tech and bribes Bill into letting her inside. But the second he opens the door, Alice pretends to drop her bag, and when Bill bends over to help her, she grabs her money back. Chapter 4. After all of that padding in the previous chapter, Alice has finally made it to the game. But even in the casino, the plot continues to not get to the point, and we wander down random thoughts such as Charlotte's astigmatism and her fears. At this point, I have to say that I know too much about a character who has yet to actually show up in the plot. She takes her slide down to the lower level and thinks about how Wonders had invented amusement parks. They're all shut down in the UK now, and apparently also parks as well. Hope nobody wants to have well-developed children because play is crucial to that. But whatever, the narration will not shut up about Alice's coffee drink. She continues to not play cards. Since the plot isn't actually going to come around anytime soon, the narration decides to do more info-dumping by way of Alice listening to more of the podcast. Maddie talks some about the Queen of the Wonders and tells the listeners that rumor has it that the trials are Scarlet's way of finding an heir, which would be fine, except that haven't the trials been going on for years and years now? Why would she not pick somebody in all that time? Alice's staunch refusal to actually play cards takes us down another memory of her fighting with her sister, this time over how their parents are dead, which, the longer that this drags out, the more that you have to say that Alice's hunches are probably going to be right. After all, if their parents had simply been killed in a car crash or whatever, why would Charlotte simply not tell Alice about that? It's so painfully obvious what's going to happen. Filed under books for children who have never read anything in their entire lives. Scarlet or Blanche or whatever the book wants to call her slides into the bar stool next to Alice. As she strikes up a conversation with Alice, I want to drive an ice pick into my brain for having to read the Z's. No, I am not kidding. There are like 5 in a row, and I get that it's supposed to be the French pronunciation of the, but at the same time, this is bad writing and the author should feel bad. Anyway, Scarlet asks if Alice liked the gift, which prompts Alice to look more closely at the book Scarlet had left behind on the train. It's titled A History of the Modern Monarchy in a Kingdom Divided, but the physical age of the book suggests that it's somehow a century older than the title. Alice tries to give it back. No, it is a gift. I hope it will be of use to you in finding your way. Let me guess. Scarlet can sense that Alice is the one true Wonderland heir, tracked her down somehow, and will be her patron for the trials. And the book is actually this season's mystery invitation that Alice has to puzzle out. And judging by the different sections in the book, Alice will probably figure out by the end of the first act. How close am I, author? Alice then sits there and basically turns into a giant lesbian over Scarlet, but she also muses over why nobody has turned her in yet and thinks about doing so. Finally, somebody calls that the card game is going to start. For all of the hurrying Alice did to go to the illegal casino claiming that she was going to be late, she sure did wait around while twiddling her thumbs for the longest time. She literally had time for her coffee to cool, so don't tell me that it wasn't at least half an hour. Alice joins the table where a man named Griff. Seriously, are we seriously going to go down all of the minor characters from the original series? Tells them to place their bets. The girl gets angry that she doesn't know what game that they're playing, which is a fair point to make. A bet on Go Fish is going to be different than on poker. Griff gets angry and tells her to either place her bet or leave. Alice puts down some cash, and once everybody is in, Griff tells them that they're going to be playing Scrabby Queen or Old Maid. Some of the players get angry, saying that their gran could play, which is kind of fair, but grannies can also play poker, so the bar is honestly on the floor with this one. Anyway, so they play. And while there is some description, at least it's not a literal play-by-play of what's going on, so good job, author. The bar was on the ground, but hey, at least you left the shovel at home for this one. Blanche shows up and takes over for Griff. She says that it's time for a new game, a Wonderland card game called Black Hearts. Some of the other players protested it's an illegal game, but somebody else is like, we're at an illegal gambling den, moron, which is fair. It's kind of an odd game, and I'm not quite sure that I follow the rules, but I'm also down with inventing a new card game for a book like this. But Alice has played this game before, or at least she knows of the general concept of it, and then they start to play. Thanks for listening to my book Snark on YouTube. New videos are up every Monday, but stick around because I sometimes drop random videos on other days too. Just as a reminder, even if you can't financially support me, there are other ways to help me out. The first is watching this video as well as all of my other videos. It's also important to like and subscribe. Finally, you can share this video with all of your friends so that they can help as well. If you're already caught up with all of my videos, you can go to Tumblr for my main book Snarks, always free and updated every morning. And if you've read all of my main Snarks, you can find even more Snark on my Patreon. You can access it for $1 a month. Members also get early access to my main Tumblr Snark. Special thanks to Dawn, Phoebe, and Nikki for supporting me on Patreon already. If you want to hear your name in my video next week, either support me on Patreon or make a one-time donation. Do you like my Snarks so much that you want me to snark your writing? I do that too. For just $6 per chapter, I will tell you how awful that your writing is. But not to worry if you feel like you couldn't take the criticism. I also offer regular book editing as well, just 1 cent per word. You can contact me on any of my social media platforms if you have further questions. If you want to read some of the things that I've written, you can purchase my works on Amazon. I have a slew of erotic short stories and 2 full-length novels. I also frequently run flash sales on my stories, and if you aren't following me on any social media, you might want to do so just so you can know when I might be offering things for free. Links for everything will be posted below. See you next week, guys!